looks good. We'll get to it. Here's a question. In this area, when you squint, tell me which area to circle that's the brightest on here.
Actually, the neck.
Yep. So when we look over here, it is actually the brightest, like in terms of real estate, but it's not as bright as we have it here. This is like stealing the attention to the star of the show. So what I'd have you do is be more careful as you do this in terms of like what the brightness is doing. And we could easily fix that by toning everything back down. And then redistributing where those highlights actually are. There's one right there. There is some there. There's one right here. There. And then it feels a little bit more closer to the reference. Because if we turn it off, boom, that neck is just like, look at me!
Yes.
So we just tone it down a little bit. So same thing here. If we squint and we ask ourselves what the highlight value group looks like in terms of a 2D shape, it's like going to be something like that with the darkness in there. As I go over here, the value group seems to fade off right here instead, and it has this shape instead. It's still kind of bright here, but it's not distinct enough. I want to see that distinction happening here and then fading out. What that'll look like is, I'm going to zoom out. Make sure it's as bright as it needs to be. I'm just in Squintsville right now. Alright, cool. Now it's closer where it needs to be. Then I'll put in those highlights. Definitely way too bright, but yeah. And then I'd reaffirm the shadow shapes a little bit stronger, or the value groups of the dark shapes. Right. So if we turn that off, everything's a bit muddy. Values aren't really distinct in terms of the groups, but now they're more distinct and separated. I mean, I made these highlights way too bright too, so merge that down, get in there, blend them in and stuff. Yeah, you get the picture. Cool. This one's definitely more complex because it's soft light and there's a lot of in and out of highlight spots, but it's a good start. It would be similar critiques as like the value group stuff here, but I actually want to talk about this one. So the way I would distill this down is that at the very basic level, we have a plane that is like this, like that. That's all, we could say one value group that's connected to an island of a value group here. And then the other is this value group facing that way, so it's going to be in shadow. Roughly speaking, at least. That's all down and then whatever. But at the very least, it's not pointing to the light. So what I can do is say, even more simply, that red shape, I'm just going to make a big L connected to the neck part. I'm going to go a little bit abstract here, but and then with this, it's a shape like that. And then this would be towards the light too. So granted, it's just like a weird abstraction, but if we use that as our guide by saying, okay, everything that's inside the red value group, it's going to be this color or this brightness. And then everything else will be darker. Not everything, but generally. Right, so if we turn that off, it starts to read the way it needs to be, which is the values are grouped together properly. And you could almost even see the geometry of like, okay, well, now we could go over this and see that some of these polygons or planes of the face are facing more towards the light source than not. So we could make those areas brighter or make areas around them darker to make them look brighter. So by means of reverse engineering it, I guess. Right, so then you'd have something like that. And the reason I showed that is like there's a very specific thing that's missing here, and that is that feeling of the different planes of the face. Like you could argue that, well, this is in shadow, but it's not as separate as it needs to be. Like this here is too bright of a value, because if I squint look here, that's all pretty much blacked out. Not literally black, but so I'd do this, I'd make this darker for now, that, this, a little bit there, and then I'd make everything else brighter. Alright, so now when we zoom out, it reads like the reference. If we turn it off, it all blends together. And it's suffering from, I think, the same thing as the first ones, but now we've learned how to separate those value groups, and then we can get in there and blend it, if you so choose. Let's get that highlight here, merge it down, and get them all blended up. And I think the proportions are a bit off in terms of the drawing. The eye is a little bit too small, but that's not what I'm concerned with here too much. Cool. So if we just compare that, you could see why it's so important to get those value groups where they need to be. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. You can do it. I believe in you.